Hello, Talkin fight fans around the world. Thank you for joining us. Welcome once again to another episode of The Scoop featuring the champ, Bola Ray, who's in, as I said, the opposite corner today, but ready with all guns blazing to give us, I think, actually a double barrel shotgun approach to the show tonight. Am I not right there? You got two guys lined up?
Absolutely. As I've mentioned in a few of my episodes this week, it's nothing shy of rage-inducing to think of the treatment that some of the African-American fighters had to endure last century. The Black Murderers Row were 8 fighters, of which I have showcased now 3 this week thus far. But today, I'm doing something a little different in that I'm going to actually showcase 2 of them. And not because they're any less significant, as much as there's just not that much written on them, which speaks volumes in its own right. My name is Bola Raymond Olubuwale, and this is The Scoop. Born somewhere in Texas, which, again, speaks volume because I've scoured the internet looking for exact location of his place of birth. It just says Texas. Texas is a big place. November 5th, 1917, was none other than Hilton Edward, or Eddie, as his friends would call him, Booker. Now, at some young age, his family, or him alone, migrated to San Jose, California. And that is where his boxing career began. Now, a title-winning amateur boxer was rumored to be incredibly popular, and in that neck of woods of California, and this popularity cascaded right into his professional career. The ring was the most natural habitat for this guy. Booker was seen as a complete fighter in that he had impressive muscular physique and was willing to box, but also loved to throw down at any chance he got. So was often compared to the legendary heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, because he too would do this technique of catching his opponent's punch and then with that same hand launching a counterattack. It's it was I wouldn't say revolutionary for the day, but it was definitely unique for the day. Due to his membership in the most exclusive boxing fraternity, the Black Murderers Row, his choice of dance partners was limited to mostly non-whites and definitely never a world title dance. What he did have is the opportunity to fight his fraternity brothers several times. The results speak loudly. He finished his career with a record of 66 wins, 5 losses, and 8 draws. 34 knockouts to boot. That includes a record of 3 wins, 2 losses, and 3 draws against fellow members of the Hall of Fame, famers like the Coca Kid, Lloyd Marshall, and Archie Moore. Even Holman Williams. I did a show on him a couple days ago. Booker went 1 win and 2 draws against Moore, one of the greatest fighters in history, and was the first to knock out Moore. which was no small feat, to say the least. That was in 1944. The Mongoose went down 4 times in the fight and was stopped by the referee in the 8th round. Moore was unable to continue. Now, Moore thought incredibly highly of Booker. Just thought he was the cat's ass, actually one of the greatest of all time in his opinion. He actually said, "I had some rough fights in my time, but all things being equal, when I was in my prime, one of the toughest had to be against Eddie Booker, a fighting machine who shot out punches with dealt precision. Booker was one of the greatest fighters of my time. He had me fighting for my dear life." As far as I'm concerned, that's quite the testimonial from one who some revere to be in the top 5 greatest fighters of all time. So, victories again against some of the best West Coast battlers, such as the Hogan twins, Bob Birch, and Lloyd Marshall, earned him his world ranking. Now, winning the California State middleweight title against Big Boy Hoig, he went on to defend it twice, where he fought to a draw with Moore, and then after that lost a 15-round close decision to the absolutely brilliant Jack Chase. A match with legendary Charley Burley never materialized, with Eddie confessing to his sparring partner that Burley was just about the best that was out there. So a little bit of cold feet, a little bit of underestimation. Wow, don't think that's a word, but let's work on that. Underestimating himself. Let's go with that. Booker was revered as being a good guy in and out of the ring. With his boyish smile, he won people's friendships rather easily and well. With all that going for him, he was still victimized by racism in the day, in the sport of boxing, but also by the more notably ugly side of professional boxing. In his second last fight against Holman, in his second fight against Holman, which was his last fight period, Booker won the fight in a decision, but because Holman had doctored his glove, Booker suffered permanent damage to his eye, which rendered him blind for the remainder of his life.
Wow.
But he won the fight. He left the ring at the incredibly young age of 26. And the rest of his life, he was blind. He achieved so much. Now, January 26, 1975, Quilton Edward Booker passed to the other side at the ripe young age of 57. 2017, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And it should have come a lot before that, but I really hope that they do something to honor the man, because he was such a young man, a career that spanned a professional career that spent 8 years. He was able to amass over 80 fights, and with 66 wins of those 80 fights, the man was a star. Now, The second athlete that I'm going to feature today, his early years were nothing shy of an enigma, simply because he could have had one of two beginnings. Like, yeah. On the one hand, his birth name could have been Calvin Coolidge Lytle from Victoria, Texas, and then he started boxing in the U.S. Navy, while others say that he was born in Fresco, California, and took the name from some silent movie star. Had over 30 fights while he was in the Army. Either way, the Chocolate Kid was in the ring. Name was genuinely the Southpaw sensation that tore through the late 40s and early 50s in the middleweight division. We're talking about none other than, forgive me, we're talking about none other than Bert Lytell. Outside of, or actually, he was gifted, or his gift was his biggest curse, in that, just like much of the others in the fraternity of Black Murderers Row, he was avoided by the highly ranked white fighters, and even the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson. This has been a sobering week, because I literally thought that Robinson could walk on water. Yeah. Outside of Jake LaMotta and Walter Popeye Wood, Bert had to resort to fighting other fraternity brothers to sustain his boxing career. And these fights were nothing shy of epic. Bert was remembered as being gifted and difficult to beat. He was often ranked in the top 10 in the world and was ranked as high as fifth. And yet, his phone never rang for a world title shot. Different time. In 1948, Lytell was involved in two exciting fights with the talented but doomed Jackie Dathart, the Slicker. Had over 30 bouts in his first 2 years as a professional and was ranked amongst the top 5 middleweights by the time he was 18 years old. The first fight was declared a draw, though most people thought Lytell was the clear winner. But in the return, Lytell scored a 7th round KO of Dathart, where he never regained consciousness. Despite his apparent success amongst the middleweight and light heavyweight, the Fresno Southpaw was also fall short of gaining a world title shot. In his final 2 years as a pro, Lytell dropped a decision to Archie Moore in Ate Town again, and finally in October of 1951 to Julian Keane, the world middleweight champion. Randy Turpin used him as a sparring partner when the British fighter was defending his crown against yours truly, Sugar Ray Robinson, in New York. But after the bout with Keane, Bert Lytell appeared to vanish from boxing almost as mysteriously as he appeared. He was just Never heard of, didn't fight, didn't spar, didn't do anything. It was later then deduced, January 26, 1990, 2 days after his 66th birthday, the Chocolate Kid was no longer. No. Tell me that both these stories wouldn't make incredible movies. Like, I don't know. It was a trying time. It was hard for me to ingest. Just the blatant racism and the unfair environment that these fighters had to go through. And they were entertaining. They were entertaining the masses, but they weren't being compensated anywhere remotely close to their white counterparts. It wasn't an oddity to find one. And truth be told, how can you blame them for this? But you find them having to take on side jobs, working for the mob, collections, or more importantly, door knockers. Let's say door knockers. But again, how can you fault them? They weren't making anything, or virtually anything, right? There was no nest egg to speak of.
It's funny you bring up the powers that be back then, because they honestly did control, from what I've heard from your stories, a lot of the boxing madness and mayhem, quite frankly. I have to wonder if in those back rooms, in those smoky back rooms that we see in the movies, whether those powers that be, the mob, whether they didn't, because I couldn't see a black fighter not wanting to fight a white fighter. I couldn't see a white fighter not wanting to fight a black fighter if they were both best in their respective divisions. If they were both best of the best, you would think their boxing mentality would say, yes, I want to go against that guy, because they wouldn't care. But so I have to wonder whether it's the powers that be who would say, no, we have the black fighters over here, we have the white fighters, which I can't figure it. But anyway, I'm just wondering whether it's the powers that be that made those decisions, not necessarily the fighters.
It would be a combination of the two. What I'm reading, especially when it came to Sugar Ray Robinson, was he, even in times, sometimes his handlers told him or put him out there to fight all comers, and he would make the decision. He's not fighting the Black Murderers Row. He doesn't want anything to do with them because he knows that he get beat. These guys were more like, these guys were devastating fighters. And it was more, you would think that it would be more of a scenario where they'd want the challenge, but it's more, I learned this the hard way. In the amateurs, you want to fight the best, and you have no fear about fighting anybody. But when it comes to the pros, it's a business. And you don't want to fight the best until you're compensated properly for it. And even after you're compensated properly for it, sometimes you don't want that challenge. When you want to, how you want to be knocked off the perch, being on top. That is what I'm seeing to be the reality when it comes to Sugar Ray Robinson. As for the other fighters, they knew that they'd get their ass handed to them. Therefore, let's take the easy way out and just accept that my handlers are saying no. It's a different time. It's a different time. And unfortunately, these fighters went to their grave not really being compensated properly for the gift that they handed history. So,
it's ironic in both the hockey world and the baseball world. Both of those modern organizations have celebrated the fact that a lot of their early days, although there was separate leagues, etc., for the most part, they've been welcoming to all races, for lack of a better description. And they've been honoring a lot of the black men who were first of their generation to enter into these white-dominated leagues, both hockey and baseball. So I am kind of surprised that the boxing organizations out there these days don't do something, as you were saying earlier, don't do something more formal in their respective Hall of Fames to recognize the contributions of these black fighters who obviously were ignored, okay? Surpassing that little point, surpassing the whole point of racism. But why don't they just give them the recognition that they're due as fighters?
I think that's what they think they're doing via entering them into the International Boxing Hall of Fame or the Hall of Fame, Boxing Hall of Fame. I think it's just a little too little, too late. There's no remuneration that comes from it, or at least nothing sizable. And more importantly, these guys are dead. They had they lived nothing shy of a struggle their whole lives, and they're only getting into these into these Hall of Fames in the past 2 decades. Most of them have been long gone since the 90s. So,
but if I was like a kid or a grandkid of one of those fighters, I'd like it to be known that my grandpa had done that back then.
I 100%. I totally agree. Like I said, I thought that Sugar Ray Robinson floated on water, and
yeah.
To hear that he was a predominantly, or actually almost all these guys were fighting out of California for a while, and you could either go to California and fight the best, or not, and be comfortable in the East. And he actually chose to not fight them. Waited until Wade was 2 years out. 2 years out. Called him out of retirement. Had a fight.
Wow.
Won the fight questionably because Wade's son is saying how Wade was given or was taken a bribe to take a dive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Took a dive, and it wasn't Robinson that planted that seed, but the promoter paid him off. And over and above that, afterwards, he hired Wade to be his sparring partner and then shortchanged him. So then Wade beat him up. So a guy like Wade, 2 years out, could have beaten him. What would have happened if they had fought when he was in his prime, 5-6 years prior?
Right.
This is what I call the great. Muhammad Ali referred to him as the great Sugar Ray Robinson, and this is was he great? In what arena? Against who? Right. Yeah.
You would argue he was up against tomato cans.
That's exactly it. I wouldn't say necessarily tomato cans, but literally a step below.
Right.
A step below, because any one of these 8 guys could have been world champions at one time or another in multiple different weight classes. So, yeah, he would have had his hands full, to say the least.
Well, I'm glad we live in this era. It's a lot of fun, and we're seeing a lot of great fights, a lot of great fighters. I think a lot of honest promoters now. Certainly, the leveling of that playing field has been the introduction of pay-per-view, quite frankly, right? Because now the fighters can demand, as free agents, for lack of a better word, that kind of money.
The sport's even changing. It's completely morphing into some kind of beast I just don't know anymore. It went from the mob handling things, going off and dipping their hands way too much into the scenario, to pretty much the mob being cleaned up, and then individual promoters running things, the Don Kings, the Bob Arams, what have you. And then all of a sudden the fighters learned a thing or two about business. And then you get the different fighters going off and having their own promotional companies, like Golden Boy. Ricky Hatton had one. Joe Calzaghe had one. Lennox Lewis had one. Mayweather has one. Pacquiao has one. You understand? So then all of a sudden now it's the individual fighters who are doing the promotions. Per se. Only to now you see you don't even need to know how to box. You have those two brothers, Jake Paul and whatever. Oh,
Lo-
sweet mother.
Logan
Like,
Paul.
like just walk into oncoming traffic, please. Like, please, because it's all about hype now. It's gotten away from athleticism. And it's all about talking shit. I'll do everything I can to revert history from going down that trajectory, because it's nothing. There's a brick wall going down that way.
The idiots are going to get clobbed for sure when they step into the ring against a real boxer.
Sure, but they won't. And in terms of fighting, they're making $20 million a fight.
It was Zab Judah. It was Zab Judah who told us that, and I can't remember which Paul he was talking about, Jake Paul or Logan Paul, was taking his training extremely seriously.
I don't care.
No, I'm just simply saying. So he'll get beat by a real boxer anyway.
Yeah.
And he'll get his money via pay-per-view, which is what he wants. His millions of Twitch followers will pay him handsomely for getting beaten up.
And that's my point. You have fighters who, like genuine champions, who didn't make $20 million in their career. And this nothing goes off and makes it in a night. Or what's that? McGregor made $100 million. Like, I can count on one hand with fingers to spare the amount of fighters that made more than $100 million in their career. Not in one night. This guy made it in his first night of boxing. And actually, I'll give it to him. He didn't do as bad as I thought he would. Actually, he showed a great deal of athleticism, but he should have been destroyed. Like, it was... Yeah, there's a leveling of the playing field needs to happen, because this insanity where just being able to talk shit will get you rewarded to that magnitude just doesn't sit well. But
I think it'll all be sifted and sorted out. I like I said, I think, when I hear the other show hosts talk about all the up and coming great boxers and all the different weight divisions, and Mike talking about the knockout artists that he's discovering, whether we're talking about from Australia, whether we're talking about from Japan, whether we're talking about Puerto Rico, anywhere in the Americas or Europe, there are an awful lot of great boxers coming out in all different weight classes, properly trained, properly enthusiastic, properly aggressive, and hopefully will be compensated for that journey, for the chance to fight for a title, for a belt. That's what I would hope. That's what I hope it works.
I hope it works too. For the sake of the sport, yeah, I hope it works, but this nonsense where guys going off and not having anything called anything and being able to garner that kind of payday, well, it's not just non-sustainable. It's unfortunate, because what are you teaching kids? What are you teaching the next generation? You don't need to work hard. You just need to have a big mouth. And then go take a good trouncing. Maybe
that's the way it's been throughout history.
Yeah, and I'm the fool.
The pen is mightier than the sword. Is that what they say?
Yeah.
Right on. Okay, that is the scoop.
That's a scoop. If you like this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget the notification bell. There's your boy Bola, and that's a scoop.
Thanks very much. We'll see you tomorrow night.